let's talk about how to create a table in Access. There are several different ways that you can do that. You can go in to create a table, or you can use Design View. Table will bring you up in Datasheet view. Okay, so you can add your field names here, and then you can, if you click to add, and then it will ask you what you want. I'm just going to call this last name. Then we'll ask you, which data type that you want to use for each. Okay, so that's one way that you can do it. You would have to still go back in if you wanted to change the properties and go into Design View for that. So in Design View, you would go in and just add all of your field names, the appropriate data types for each. Make sure that you have one field that's unique, that has a primary key associated with it. And then if you want to change the properties down at the bottom for each field, you can do that here. For me, that's one of the easier ways to create a table and have some control over what you are entering in one particular place. Okay, so I'm going to delete those extra tables. I do not need those. So what I would like to do is show you how to create a table and import data. And you can import data from Excel or Access primarily. So you would go under the External Data tab. Okay. Now in this case, let me show you. I have my Excel file open. This is the data that I'm using for the table that I want to create. I want to create a table for shippers so that for each order, we'll know which shipper will ship that order. So we've contracted with 5 shippers so far. Notice that I've got the field names at the top, and that it will import those as the field names, and then I have the data. So what I'll do is import the data into a table in Access, and then I'll go in and edit the data types and the properties as appropriate. So I'm going to close this file because I don't want to have that open when I'm importing my data. And then I'm just going to click on External Data, and we're going to go to New Source. And if you want it from an Access file or from other database formats, you would use the From database. But we're using Excel, so we're going under From File, and then we're going to choose Excel. Now it's going to ask me where the file is located, so I'm going to pull that in. Click on OK. So it shows me a preview of the data. I'm going to tell it that that first row contains column headings, so that it knows those aren't values for shippers. So for the field name options, we're going to say that shipper ID, we're going to use that as our primary key, so we do not want that to be duplicates. So you don't want any duplicate values in there. That should be a unique value for each shipper ID, for each shipper. Okay. I'm also going to go ahead and tell it to make that a long integer. And we'll go back in and change some of the other properties for that later. And again, I'm going to make that shipper ID my primary key field. And I'm going to import it to a table called shippers. Do not want to save the import steps. And so now it's created the table. I can open that. You can see that it's imported the data. So that's a very quick way. If you already have the data in another location, you can import that data. Now what I have to do is I need to go in, and you can look at the phone number needs a format there, and we need some additional properties set for these. So let's go into our Design View. And it's already created our primary key. So we just click that button if it had not. The shipper ID is a number. So technically I would like that to auto number. And when it auto numbers, it should automatically go from 1 to 2 to 3 and so forth. So it should automatically create that. Now, It does not like to do that in the table because I've already included data. So you see it says once you enter data into a table, you can't change the data type, even if you haven't yet added data to that field. So it does not like the fact that I'm trying to change it to an auto number. So we're going to have to leave that at number for the moment. So some of the other items that we want to change are the field sizes. For the company name, we don't really need it to be 255 characters. It's just taking up additional space. The same for the address. Let's just say 50 for that one. Same for the city. And for the state. Now the state is that 2-letter abbreviation. So I'm going to say I want that to be formatted as an uppercase. If someone enters in a value that's not uppercase, I want it to change it to uppercase. So that greater than sign will change it to an uppercase. Okay, the zip code, let me go back to state here for a second. And since I'm using the 2-letter abbreviation for state, I don't need 50 there. So that just needs to be 2. Okay, so now we can move on to the zip. For the zip, we're going to have some international addresses. So in that case, we want to make it a little longer than we normally would for our US zip code. So I'm just going to say 15. And for the country, let's just say 25. That should be long enough for the country. And for the country, I want to change that to the greater than sign so that it will format that as uppercase whenever it brings in that data, or whenever someone enters in data that's not uppercase. For the phone number, we have a number format here for the data type. So the phone number should be in the format where it has the parentheses and the dash. So we're going to add an input mask there for that. It's going to prompt us to save the table. And it's going to say, well, you're going to, you've changed some of the data types to different sizes. So in that case, when you save the table, it's going to go in and check to make sure that you're not cutting off any data if you're giving it a shorter field size. So we changed some of the field sizes up here to shorter numbers, right? Smaller numbers. So it thinks we might be cutting off data. We're not. We know that. So we're just going to say yes. We're not going to cut off any data or delete any extra data. So the next error message we get, or alert, is that the input mask wizard only works with text or date field types. You cannot use the input mask with number data types. So let's change it to short text and then go back to the input mask. Let's save the table again. I'm not worrying about the field size because once it applies that format, it's forcing it to be a certain size field. So I'm going to choose the phone number format. There are other options. You can make some customized ones if you'd like. And this is the format that it will show. The 9s mean that a number will go there, but it's optional. You don't have to enter the area code. The 0s mean that it's required number that needs to be in each of those spots. It will ask you if you want to store with the special characters, the symbols like the parentheses and the dash, or without those. So we know we're going to display it with the symbols, so there's no need to really save it with the symbols. So we're going to save it without the symbols, and we'll finish. It places the input mask there, and we'll save. Okay. So if we go back to our datasheet view, you can see that now it's put that in the format for a normal phone number. Okay. For the contract begins, that should be the date that the contract starts with that shipper. So we can't really say it's a future date. So let's just say, for example, that it can't be a time in the future that the date the contract starts should be either a previous date or today's date. We're not going to start a contract in the future. So when we go in for the contract begins, we would just say for the validation rule that it needs to be less than or equal to today's date. So we're going to use that now function, and you should recognize that from Excel. It will pull in today's date. Okay, so that's the rule. What data are we limiting? So the text is the error message that will tell them if they try to enter in a date that's greater than today's date, it will not work. So the validation text would be, you must enter a date prior to or equal to today's date. Okay, so I'm going to save the table. And it knows I've changed data integrity rules because I've put a validation rule on there now. So it's going to go in and check the table to see if anything is greater than today's date. So we'll just say yes. So if I went into contract begins, and if I made this 2021, it's going to tell me, it's going to give me that error message that says you must enter a date prior to or equal to today's date. Okay, so I'm just going to escape back out of that, and it goes back to 2020. So you see how that validation rule and text will work. So let's do the same thing for the country. Let's just say for right now, we're only going to use shippers that are in the US or Canada. So in that case, hopefully we'll expand later and we can add additional shippers. But let's say our shipper has to be from USA or Canada. So the validation rule would be USA or Canada. And it will include the quotes because it recognizes those as text values. So the validation text or error message should be something like, you must enter either USA or Canada. Okay, so we'll save that. And it knows I've just said I can only have these two values in the table in that field. So it's going to go in the table and look at the data that's already there to make sure it's not violating those rules. So we'll say yes, go ahead and do that. And then we'll go into our other view. So in datasheet view, if we choose a country and let's just say France, it's going to say you must enter either USA or Canada. Okay, so we'll go back in and enter one of those values. So we could go back in to our country, and most of our countries are going to be the shippers in the USA. So we could add USA as our, we could even put it in lowercase because we're uppercasing it here. So we could just go ahead and put in USA that the value will default to USA. So you can see when I enter in that next record, USA is already there, so I will not have to complete that. It already knows that that's the default value. You can go in and change it if you need to, but it's already there, so that saves you less time. Okay. Now we have completed the table, and we have the primary key. So we will need that for our relationships. So let's go in and set up the relationship. So we want to add the shippers table, and we want to link it to the shipper ID here in the order table so that we know who's shipping each order. Okay, so I actually already have the shippers in the table, in the orders table. I'm going to close that so I can relate these. So we're going to pull this one over. We're going to create the relationship. We're going to drag shipper ID and drop it onto shipper ID in the orders table. Make sure we've enforced all of those, and we'll create it. Now what it's doing is making sure that any data that's in the orders table for those shippers is the same as the shipper ID in the shipper table. So we had 5 shipper IDs, right? So if I had anything in the orders table that was greater than 5 here, it would not accept it. Okay, it would catch that through relating those 2 tables together. Okay, so that's nice. So what I would like to do is in the orders table, save this. When we use the ship via, we have just the numbers there. Let's add a drop down similar to what we've got here for our customers. So let's add a drop down, a lookup field for the shipped. So it will look up the shipper ID in the shippers table, and I can choose it from the drop down here. So let's go into and it's going to make me delete that relationship most likely. So let's try it and see. So let's go in here, and all you have to do to change it to a lookup field is go to shipper ID, and for the data type, choose lookup wizard. Okay, so it's going to tell me you can't change it because it's in a relationship. You have to delete the relationship first, or just not set it up, and then come back and do that. So I'm going to go back into my relationships, and I'm going to delete that. And see, it's telling me the orders table is open here. And yes, I'll save it. So now I can delete the relationship. Yes, I want to delete it. Okay, and now I can go back into my orders table, into design view. And for the shipper ID, now I can go into the lookup wizard and tell it that I want to pull in the shipper IDs from the other table. So I want to pull it from the shippers table, and I want it to show the shipper ID, and in this case I want to show the company name, so I know which company name goes with which shipper ID number. And I'm going to tell it to sort in the drop-down list by company name, just so that I think it's easier. People would remember the company name and look for that before they would the number. So I'm going to tell it not to hide the shipper ID key. And we're going to select the shipper ID there to store in the database. I will enable data integrity and restrict any deleting there. And it's going to say the table must be saved before relationships can be created. So we'll say yes. So now when we go back into our other view, in datasheet view, we have the shipped via here, and you can see that it has the drop down for the shipper ID and the shipper. Now what we can do is if we go under shipper ID under the lookup, this is where it has the SQL code behind it, and structured query language is SQL code, and that's what they use to pull data from tables in Access. So it's working kind of behind the scenes. But where it says column heads, I'm going to say yes. And let's save it and go back. So what that will do is it's going to put shipper ID here and company name here so that it just looks a little more professional so that I know what data is in each column. Okay, so that makes it a lot easier. Now, for the relationship, remember we tried to set that up first and it didn't like that, so we had to delete it. But when you create a lookup field, it's automatically going to go back in and create that relationship for you. And notice it automatically included the referential integrity there. It's a one-to-many relationship, meaning that each shipper can handle many orders. So that's a detailed lesson on how to create tables in Access, a little bit of information about some of the properties and setting up your relationships and how all of those things tie together.